She closed the door behind us and said, "You always made me feel special." This time, she wasn't talking about my photography. "Hello, I'm Jamie. I'm 24, and I'd been documenting her hotel renovation for 3 weeks. Catherine was 50, elegant and completely off-limits. But there we stood in her empty Victorian lobby at dusk. Just us. I'm not the type to make the first move. Never have been. I notice things, the way someone tucks their hair when nervous, how they hold their coffee cup like armor. Catherine's hand was still on the deadbolt. "Jamie," she said, and my name had never sounded so dangerous. "But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world." I was eating instant ramen in my cramped studio apartment when the email notification lit up my phone. Another wedding inquiry, probably. Those kept me afloat, but weren't exactly moving my career forward. I kept scrolling through photos from my latest gig while fishing out the last noodles with my chopsticks. Then I saw the sender's name, Catherine Winters. I didn't recognize it, but the subject line caught my eye. Documentation project, historic. Hotel renovation. My chopsticks clattered against the bowl as I opened the email. "Dear Mr. Belrose," it began. "I discovered your architectural photography portfolio online and was particularly struck by your ability to capture spaces as if they hold memories within their walls." I sat up straighter, my dinner forgotten. The email went on to describe a month-long documentation project at a boutique hotel renovation in Hudson Valley, room and board included. The property was a Victorian-era hotel that had been closed for years, and she wanted to chronicle its transformation from start to finish. My heart picked up speed as I scrolled through the details. The pay was better than what I usually made from 3 wedding weekends. But it was her description of my work that kept drawing my attention back. No one had ever quite captured what I was trying to do with architectural photography before. I opened a new tab and started researching the property. The hotel was a grand old Dane from the 1880s, all steep roofs and ornate trimwork, perched on a hill overlooking the Hudson River. Most recent photos showed it looking tired but dignified, like a dowager aunt who'd fallen on hard times but kept her pearls polished. Without letting myself overthink it, I clicked reply. "Dear Ms. Winters, I would be honored to document your renovation project." I kept the rest professional but warm, matching her tone, and attached my formal portfolio. She responded within the hour. We spent the next few days working out logistics over email. Each message from her was efficient, but had these little personal touches: a note about the original builder's vision, a story about finding vintage wallpaper during the initial inspection. I found myself looking forward to her responses more than I probably should have. Between emails, I threw myself into preparation. I ordered new memory cards, cleaned all my lenses, and spent evenings reading about architectural restoration. My father would have laughed at me getting excited about a temporary gig. He still thought I should have used my art degree to go into advertising or something stable. But this felt different, like it could be a turning point. The weekend before my September departure date, I started packing my equipment into my old van. Each camera went into its padded case, every lens wrapped carefully. I'd learned the hard way about bumpy country roads and unprotected gear. As I Tetrised everything into the back, I found myself wondering about Catherine Winters. What kind of person looks at a forgotten hotel and sees possibility? Who puts that much care into preserving old spaces? Her emails painted a picture of someone thoughtful and passionate about the project, but I couldn't quite imagine her. I made one final supply run: fresh notebooks, backup batteries, an extra hard drive. The practical preparations helped channel my nervous energy. This was the biggest solo project I'd landed since graduating, and I didn't want to mess it up. The night before departure, I sat on my fold-out couch bed, flipping through the preliminary photos Catherine had sent. Faded grandeur in every frame, sweeping staircases dulled by dust, ornate moldings waiting to be restored, windows that needed to remember how to let in light. By now I knew every angle of the place, at least in 2 dimensions. Tomorrow, I'd start the drive up to Hudson Valley Tomorrow, I'd actually walk through those spaces I'd been studying. Tomorrow, I'd meet the woman who believed in second chances for old hotels and who, for whatever reason, believed I was the right person to tell its story. I finally forced myself to try to sleep, but my mind kept wandering back to those email exchanges, to the way she described the hotel like it was a living thing waiting to be awakened. Like it was more than just another job. Maybe it was. The September afternoon painted everything in honeygold as I followed my GPS through the Hudson Valley. Ancient maples lined the winding roads, their leaves just starting to think about turning. I'd driven past 3 small towns and countless farm stands when the navigation announced my destination was approaching on the right. The gravel driveway curved up a gentle hill, and then I saw it. The hotel rose like something from another century, which I suppose it was. 3 stories of Victorian ambition stretched across the landscape, with wraparound porches that seemed to embrace the entire building. Gothic Revival details adorned every corner, intricate wooden trim, steep roof peaks, and windows that soared toward the sky. Even weathered, it had presence. I pulled up slowly, the gravel crunching under my van's tires. That's when I noticed her in the doorway. Catherine Winters stood framed by the entrance, one hand resting on the doorframe. She wore a cream sweater and dark jeans that looked effortlessly elegant, and her auburn hair streaked with silver that caught the afternoon light fell in loose waves past her shoulders. She started down the steps as I parked, and I quickly checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. 3 hours of driving hadn't done my appearance any favors. "Mr. Belrose?" Her voice carried across the driveway, warm and clear. "I'm Catherine Winters. Just James is fine," I said, meeting her halfway. Her handshake was both professional and welcoming, her fingers slender but strong against mine. "Then please, call me Catherine." She smiled, and fine lines appeared at the corners of her eyes. "How was your drive?" "Beautiful, though I think I passed the same antique store 3 times. That's Hudson Valley navigation for you." She gestured toward the hotel. "Would you like a quick tour of the exterior before we lose the light? There are some original features I'd love you to document." I grabbed my camera bag from the van, and we began circling the property. Catherine pointed out architectural details I might have missed, the hand-carved corbels under the eaves, the original glass in some of the upper windows, the subtle pattern in the slate roof tiles. But what caught my attention more was how she came alive talking about the hotel's potential. "This porch ceiling," she said, pointing upward, "we found the original blue paint under layers of white. It's meant to look like the sky." Her eyes lit up as she described her vision for the space. "I want to restore that, give guests a piece of that Victorian optimism." The tour continued around to a smaller building set slightly apart from the main hotel. "This was the carriage house," Catherine explained, producing a key. "I've set up the upper floor as an apartment for you. I hope it'll be comfortable." She led me up a narrow staircase to a surprisingly spacious room. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating wood floors and simple, clean furnishings. A small kitchen occupied one corner, and a door presumably led to a bathroom. "I apologize for any dust," she said, running a finger along a windowsill. "We haven't quite finished cleaning everything." "It's perfect," I assured her, and I meant it. After my cramped studio apartment, this felt like a luxury suite. "Really, thank you." Catherine smiled, seemingly relieved. "Well, I'll let you get settled in. We can start properly tomorrow morning, say 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock? That works great." She headed toward the stairs, then turned back. "Oh, and I've prepared dinner, if you'd like to join me after you've had a chance to unpack. Nothing fancy, just some pasta. No pressure at all, but you're welcome to come up to the main house." There was something in her tone, casual but weighted with possibility, that made my pulse quicken slightly. "That would be great," I heard myself say. "Thank you." "Wonderful. Take your time settling in. I'm in the East Wing kitchen. Just follow the wraparound porch all the way around. You can't miss it." She descended the stairs, her footsteps fading on the gravel outside. I stood in the middle of my new temporary home, camera bag still slung over my shoulder, trying to process the last hour. The space around me held that particular quiet of old buildings, patient, waiting. Through the windows, I could see the main hotel catching the last warm light of day. I set my camera bag down carefully. Dinner with Catherine Winters. Somehow, that felt like more than just a meal with a client. Following the porch around the east wing, I found warm light spilling from tall French doors. Catherine moved about the kitchen inside, silhouetted against cream-colored walls. I hesitated, watching her arrange something on the counter with careful attention. Even this simple domestic moment carried a kind of grace. I knocked softly on the doorframe. She turned, smile brightening. "James, perfect timing. Please come in." The kitchen was clearly one of the first rooms she'd restored. Modern appliances blended seamlessly with original features. Copper pots hung from an ancient beam, and marble countertops gleamed beneath updated lighting. A small table by the French doors was already set for two. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, setting my camera bag carefully beside my chair. "You can open this," she said, handing me a bottle of wine and a corkscrew. "I hope red is okay?" "Perfect." I worked the cork free while she finished plating pasta, tossed with cherry tomatoes and herbs. The domesticity of the moment struck me. The gentle clink of plates, the way she moved around me to retrieve glasses, the growing dusk beyond the windows. "This kitchen's gorgeous," I said as we sat. "The restoration work is impressive. Thank you." She poured the wine, her silver-streaked hair falling forward slightly. It was the first room I tackled. Felt important to have one fully functional space while working on the rest. The pasta was simple but delicious, clearly made from scratch. As we ate, Catherine told me about the property's history, how her aunt had owned it for 30 years, keeping it closed but maintained, and then left it to her instead of Catherine's more conventional brother. "She was quite the character, my Aunt Vivian," Catherine said, refilling our glasses. "Never married, lived exactly as she pleased. I think she saw something of herself in me, especially after." She paused, twirling pasta thoughtfully. "Well, after my divorce finalized last year. That's when I finally decided to do something. With this place." I nodded, letting her lead the conversation. "What made you choose restoration over selling?" I needed ... She considered her words carefully. "I needed to prove I could create something meaningful on my own." "That sounds terribly self-important, doesn't it?" "Not at all," I said quietly. "I understand completely." Her eyes met mine briefly before she changed the subject. "Tell me more about your photography experience. I've only seen your architectural work online." I explained my background: art school, early struggles, gradually building a portfolio of building documentation and restoration photography. She listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed she'd really studied my work. "Would you mind showing me more of your portfolio?" she asked as we finished eating. "I'd love to see the pieces that didn't make it online." I retrieved my laptop from my camera bag, and she moved her chair closer as I opened my portfolio. Her shoulder was inches from mine as she leaned in to see the screen. "These," she said, pointing to a series of images from an old theater restoration. "These are what convinced me to hire you. The way you capture spaces, like they're holding their breath, waiting to share their stories." Her finger traced the edge of a particularly moody shot. "You always made me feel special." The words hung in the air between us. She'd been referring to how my lens treated old architecture, but something in her voice carried additional weight. A subtle current of meaning that made my pulse quicken. Catherine seemed to realize what she'd said. She paused, then stood abruptly and walked to the French doors, looking out at the darkening garden. I remained at the table, camera bag at my feet, processing the undercurrent in her words. "I think we should start with the ballroom tomorrow," she said after a moment, her back still turned, voice carefully neutral. "The morning light through those east windows is quite beautiful." I could only see her silhouette now against the twilight sky, but the tension in her shoulders was visible. Something had shifted in the room, subtle but undeniable, like the first tremor before an avalanche. The rhythm of work settled into my bones that first week, as natural as breathing. I'd wake before dawn, catching the softest morning light as it crept through the hotel's east-facing windows. Catherine would often find me already set up, tripod steady on creaking floorboards, waiting for that perfect moment when sunlight painted the walls gold. "You're making her look beautiful," she said one morning, appearing beside me as I reviewed shots of the main staircase. Her finger traced the curved banister in my viewfinder. "See how the light catches the original brass? We're keeping every piece of hardware we can salvage." I learned to read the building through her eyes. Each room held stories she'd uncovered through months of research, which walls were original, which moldings needed precise restoration. She'd brush her fingers along decorative plasterwork, explaining techniques that hadn't been used in a century. Her knowledge wasn't just academic. She spoke about the hotel like someone in love. We developed an easy shorthand by the third day. "Can you get the angle where?" She'd start, and I'd already be moving the tripod. "What if we waited until?" I'd suggest, and she'd nod, understanding immediately why afternoon light would better serve that particular space. The small things started catching my attention. How she'd absently tuck her hair behind her ear while studying architectural plans. The way she switched from coffee to tea precisely at 3 o'clock each afternoon, always Earl Grey with a splash of milk. Her quiet laugh when I'd make dry comments about the contractor's creative interpretation of period appropriate. She began bringing lunch wherever I was shooting, simple sandwiches on good bread, fresh fruit, sometimes still warm cookies. We'd sit on drop cloths or wooden crates, talking about everything and nothing. She asked thoughtful questions about my technique, genuinely curious about the technical aspects of preservation photography. "My father thinks I'm wasting my degree," I admitted one afternoon, sharing pieces of an orange. "He paid for business school, got me an accounting job interview. Couldn't understand why I'd rather document old buildings." "Parents rarely understand choosing passion over security," she said softly. "But passion builds beautiful things." She was looking at the ceiling medallion I'd been photographing, but something in her voice felt personal. The carriage house became my sanctuary for editing. I'd work late into the night, studying each image on my laptop screen, trying to capture the soul Catherine saw in every room. The space was simple but comfortable, a small sitting room, bedroom, and kitchenette. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of light in her study window across the garden, knowing she was also working late. On the 6th evening, my phone buzzed with a text while I was culling photos. "I've opened a bottle that's too good to drink alone," she wrote. "Would you like to review the week's shots in my study instead of the kitchen? Bring your laptop if you're not too tired." I hesitated only briefly before responding. Our interactions had maintained clear professional boundaries despite the growing warmth between us. Still, something about the study invitation felt different than our kitchen meetings. "You give me 10 minutes to pull together the highlights," I texted back. As I gathered my equipment, I could see her study light glowing warmly through the trees like a beacon in the autumn darkness. The week had built something between us, a foundation of shared purpose and quiet understanding. Whether that foundation would support anything more remained to be seen. I checked my reflection quickly in the bathroom mirror, running a hand through my hair before heading out into the night air. The path to the main house was lit by old-fashioned lanterns Catherine had restored, casting pools of gentle light across the gravel. Each step took me closer to her study window, where I could now see her silhouette moving behind gauzy curtains. I paused at the study door, knocking softly, even though it stood partially open. Catherine looked up from her laptop, the warm lamplight catching the silver in her hair. "Come in," she smiled, gesturing to the leather sofa where she sat. I've already poured for both of us." The study felt different from the rest of the hotel, more lived in, more personal. Built-in bookshelves lined the walls, filled with architectural references and restoration guides. Large drawings were pinned up, showing cross-sections of the building's bones. A desk by the window held stacks of contractor estimates and material samples. She handed me a glass of red wine without asking if I wanted it, the kind of comfortable gesture that comes from learning someone's habits. I settled beside her on the sofa, close enough to share her laptop screen, but still maintaining what felt like a proper professional distance. "I've been going through today's shots," she said, turning the screen slightly. "The ballroom ones are extraordinary." Her finger traced the edge of a photo where afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, creating long shadows across the herringbone floor. "You caught exactly what I was trying to explain about the original parquet." I leaned in to point out how I'd positioned the camera to capture the brass wall sconces. "If we wait for that same light tomorrow, we could." Her knee brushed against mine as she shifted to see where I was indicating. Neither of us acknowledged the contact, but I felt suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. Instead of moving away, she tucked one leg underneath herself, adjusting her position but maintaining that same proximity. The wine felt warm in my chest as I clicked through to show her alternative angles I'd tried. "See how the crown molding catches shadow here?" I zoomed in on a detail shot. "That's original plasterwork." "Yes, exactly." Her enthusiasm was contagious. "The craftsman who did this understood how light would play across it throughout the day. That's what I want to preserve, not just the physical details, but how they work with the space." Our conversation flowed easily between technical aspects and aesthetic observations. I explained my choices about aperture and timing. She shared historical details about similar architectural features in other Hudson Valley properties. The professional focus helped mask the growing awareness of her presence beside me, the faint scent of her perfume, the way her hand would occasionally brush mine when pointing to something on screen. Then she sat back slightly, taking a sip of wine. "My daughter would love your perspective on this. She has such an eye for detail, gets it from her father, actually. She's about your age, studying medicine up in Boston." The mention landed exactly as she'd intended, a gentle but firm reminder of boundaries. I felt the shift in the room's atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable. Catherine stood, wine glass in hand, and walked to the window overlooking the dark gardens. "The contractors are starting on the 3rd floor tomorrow," she said, her back to me. "They'll need access to the north wing by 8, so we should plan to shoot there first." I recognized what she was doing, creating literal and figurative distance, steering us back to safer territory. The disappointment I felt confirmed something I hadn't fully admitted to myself about how I'd begun to see her. But there was also relief in her careful redirection. She was protecting us both from complications neither of us could afford. "8 works for me," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "The morning light up there should be perfect." She remained by the window, silhouetted against the glass. I could see her reflection, the way she held herself carefully still, like someone working to maintain balance. The space between us felt charged with everything we weren't saying. "The 3rd floor has some of the best original features," she continued, her voice deliberately neutral. "The doorframes still have their rosettes intact. October brought the kind of rain that made the whole world feel smaller, more intimate. The steady drumming on the hotel's slate roof became a constant companion as we worked around the contractors, their tools creating rhythmic counterpoint to the weather. I found Catherine in the library one morning, architectural drawings spread across the wide plank floor. She sat cross-legged among them, hair loosely tied back, wearing one of her signature cream sweaters. She looked up when I entered, gesturing to the organized chaos around her. "I needed to double-check some measurements for the contractor," she explained, "but I keep getting distracted by Aunt Vivian's original renovation notes." I settled down across from her, careful not to disturb the papers. The rain intensified outside, making the library feel like a cocoon. Catherine traced her finger along a faded pencil line, lost in thought. 20 years of marriage," she said suddenly, still looking at the drawing. "And somehow we didn't notice we were becoming strangers until it was already done." She glanced up, meeting my eyes. No drama, no betrayal. Just 2 people who forgot how to want things together. The vulnerability in her voice made me want to offer something equally honest in return. "My father still introduces me as his son who is finding himself through photography." I smiled, but it felt tight. "He paid for art school, expecting practical returns. When I dropped out, he called it wasted potential." Catherine sat back against the base of a leather armchair, giving me her full attention. How long ago was that? 2 years. I've been proving I can build something without the degree ever since. I gestured to my camera bag. Some days it feels like I'm getting somewhere. Others ... Others, you wonder if he was right? Her question was gentle, understanding. Yeah. I watched raindrops trace patterns on the library windows, but I couldn't stay. The program felt like it was teaching us to see things the way everyone else does. I wanted to capture how spaces feel, not just how they look. That's exactly what I saw in your portfolio, Catherine said, leaning forward slightly. You treat these old buildings like they have stories to tell. The rain continued its steady percussion as we talked through the afternoon. Catherine described the year after her divorce, selling the house that felt too big, rediscovering what it meant to make decisions solely for herself. I kept thinking I'd waited too long, she admitted. That I'd spent so many years being practical, I'd forgotten how to want things without apologizing for them. As evening approached, we migrated to the library's leather sofa. The contractors had gone home, leaving the hotel quiet except for the storm. Catherine tucked her feet under her, cradling a cup of tea. You're an old soul, she said suddenly, then laughed at herself. God, that sounds like such a cliché. I feel more myself with you than with people my age, I replied without thinking. Her laughter stopped abruptly. The space between us on the sofa seemed to crackle with possibility. I could hear both our breathing, slightly out of sync with each other. Catherine set her tea down carefully, like she was buying time to compose herself. When she stood, the movement felt reluctant. She paused at the library door, one hand gripping the frame as if to steady herself. Good night, she said softly. Not quite looking back at me, I watched her hesitation. The way her fingers pressed against the wood before she finally stepped through the doorway. The rain continued falling. Witnessed everything we weren't saying out loud. The next evening settled over the hotel like a held breath. After the contractors packed up their tools and left, Catherine found me reviewing the day's shots on my laptop. Would you mind if we looked at those in the library? She asked. Something in her voice caught my attention, careful neutrality that suggested she was weighing each word. The lights better in there? I followed her down the hallway, watching how deliberately she moved, like someone who had made up their mind, but wasn't quite ready to admit it. The library welcomed us with its familiar warmth, leather-bound books catching the last rays of sunset through rain-streaked windows. We settled onto the same sofa where we'd sat yesterday, but Catherine maintained a measured distance between us. She positioned herself at an angle, one arm draped across the back cushion, creating a subtle barrier. I pulled up the new images, but our discussion quickly drifted away from work. Catherine mentioned a novel she'd been reading about restoration projects in Europe, which led to sharing travel dreams, places we hoped to photograph or restore someday. I spent so many years fitting my plans around other people's schedules, she said, absently turning her pearl earring. After 40, it's like you become invisible unless you're following the expected script. Soccer mom, corporate wife, committee volunteer. She smiled, but it held an edge. This hotel. It was the first time in years I made a decision purely for myself. How did people react? I asked, genuinely curious. Oh, the usual concerned questions. Was I sure? Wasn't it risky? Wouldn't I rather do something sensible with the inheritance? She shook her head. Nobody actually said I was too old to start over, but I could see it in their eyes. Her words resonated with my own fears. I get different versions of the same thing, I admitted. Everyone waiting for me to grow up and get a real job. Like, I'm just another kid with a camera, playing at being an artist. Catherine turned to face me fully then, her expression intense. Your work shows depth beyond your years, she said quietly. You see things others miss, the weight of history in empty rooms, the stories held in shadow and light. That's not playing, that's understanding. The space between us seemed to pulse with unspoken possibilities. When she stood to leave, I acted on impulse, reaching for her hand. Catherine. She froze at the contact, looking down at our joined hands. I could feel her pulse against my fingers, slightly rapid. When she turned back, I watched the shift in her expression, the moment she stopped fighting whatever this was between us. "We should talk about this," she said softly. "About what we're doing, yes." I didn't let go of her hand, but I didn't pull her closer either. We both understood the importance of this moment's balance. Catherine sank back onto the sofa, closer. "This time, I'm 27 years older than you," she started, direct but gentle. "That's not a small thing." "I know." I traced my thumb across her knuckles, feeling the delicate bones beneath her skin. "But it's not the most important thing about who we are to each other." "No," she agreed. "But it affects everything, expectations, experiences, what people would think." "I'm not asking for promises," I interrupted carefully. "Just honesty. Whatever this is, we can face it together." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I've spent months renovating this place, stripping away layers to find what's real underneath. And here you are, seeing through walls I thought were solid." "Are you afraid?" I asked. "Yes," she squeezed my hand. "But not of you. Of wanting something this much at a point in life when I'm supposed to be settling for less." We talked for hours, being careful with each other's hearts while refusing to diminish what was growing between us. Catherine shared her fears about being seen as predatory or desperate, while I admitted my worry that she might not trust the depth of my feelings because of my age. The conversation was measured, mature, neither of us rushing toward or away from the complexity of our situation. We acknowledged the challenges, social judgment, different life stages, the weight of experience gaps. But we also recognized something rare and genuine in our connection, something worth protecting. Catherine settled back onto the sofa, maintaining the careful space between us, but turning to face me directly. Her fingers remained loosely twined with mine, a tenuous connection neither of us seemed willing to break. "I need you to understand what this would mean," she said, her voice gentle but serious. "Not just for us, but how others would see it. The assumptions they'd make, the judgment we'd face." "I do understand," I assured her. "But I've never," I paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound trite. "I've never connected with someone the way I do with you. It's not about age or circumstance. It's about how you see the world, how you listen, how you make me want to be better at what I do." She smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in it. "That's part of what scares me. I worry about becoming a cliché, the divorced woman who latches onto a younger man to feel vital again." Her free hand moved to brush back a strand of silver-streaked hair. "I've spent my whole life avoiding being that person who needs validation from others. Is that what you think this is?" I asked quietly. "No," she answered without hesitation. "That's what makes it more frightening. This feels real in a way I wasn't prepared for." We sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, the rain outside providing a gentle backdrop to our conversation. Catherine's thumb traced absent patterns on my palm, each touch sending quiet sparks through my skin. "There are practical things to consider," she continued. "The renovation project I hired you professionally. We need to maintain boundaries there, protect your work and my investment." I nodded. "I agree. The documentation needs to stay separate from whatever this becomes. And Sarah, my daughter." Catherine's voice wavered slightly. "She's your age. How do I explain this to her without it sounding?" She trailed off, unable to find the right word. "Predatory?" I supplied gently, "Because it's not. We're both adults making a conscious choice. If anything, you've been more careful about boundaries than I have." She laughed softly. "Is that what you call this past week? Being less careful?" "I call it being honest," I said. "With myself and with you." Catherine studied our joined hands, then looked up at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Really sure?" Because once we crossed this line, I stood slowly, keeping her gaze as I stepped closer. My hands moved to frame her face, fingers sliding into her hair, but I waited, giving her time to pull away. If she needed to, she didn't. Instead, she nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes never leaving mine. The first kiss was gentle, questioning, a soft press of lips that asked permission even as it was granted. Catherine's breath hitched, and something shifted. Her hands came up to grip my shirt as she pressed closer, deepening the kiss with a certainty that made my head spin. Time suspended itself around us, measured only in shared breaths and the steady drum of rain against windows. Every point of contact felt electric, her fingers twisting in my shirt, the warmth of her skin under my palms, the way she sighed when I traced her lower lip with my tongue. She pulled back first, breathing unsteadily. Her fingers remained tangled in my shirt, like she needed the anchor point to steady herself. The lamplight caught the flush in her cheeks, the slight tremble in her lips. "I need to think," she whispered. But we both heard what went unspoken. The decision was already made, had perhaps been made days ago. We were just now catching up to it that Catherine stepped away quickly, her hand trailing down my arm in a final contact before she turned and left the library. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden emptiness. I stood alone in the warm light. Everything changed. The ghost of her kiss lingered on my lips, and I could still feel the phantom pressure of her fingers against my chest. The rain continued its steady pattern against the windows, indifferent to the shift that had just occurred in our carefully constructed world. The knocking pulled me from sleep before dawn. I blinked at my phone. 5:45 in the morning. Through the carriage house windows, the sky was still dark violet, stars fading. When I opened the door, Catherine stood there holding 2 steaming coffee cups, wearing a soft gray cardigan against the October chill. Her smile was different, lighter, almost playful. It made her look younger than I'd seen her yet. "I decided I'm tired of being sensible," she announced, holding out one of the cups. "I've been up half the night thinking, and that's my conclusion." I took the offered coffee, trying to process her presence, her words, the way morning mist caught in her hair. "Come in," I offered, but she shook her head. "The porch," she suggested. "I love early mornings out here." We settled into the wooden chairs, the coffee warming our hands. The carriage house porch faced away from the main building, giving us privacy from any early arriving contractors. Birds were just beginning their morning songs. "So," I ventured, after a few sips, "not being sensible looks like bringing me coffee at dawn." She laughed softly. "It looks like admitting what I want instead of what I should want." Her eyes met mine over her cup. "But we need to be smart about this, even if we're not being sensible." I nodded, understanding. "The renovation project comes first, yes, and discretion while we figure this out." She turned slightly in her chair to face me better. "This is a small town. People love to talk, and I need to protect both the project and my reputation here. Not just for me, but for you too. Your work deserves to stand on its own merit." "Professional distance when the contractors are around," I agreed. "Keep the documentation work separate from this." "This," she echoed with a small smile. "We haven't even defined what this is yet. We have time to figure it out." She reached over and touched my hand, her fingers cool from the morning air. "We'll talk more tonight?" "After everyone's gone, I'd like that." She stood, reluctance clear in her movements. "I should get back before anyone arrives. The painting crew starts at 7. I watched her walk away through the morning mist, her cardigan pulled close against the chill. Just before rounding the corner of the main house, she glanced back with that same unguarded smile. The day felt different, even though nothing obvious changed. I set up my equipment in the restored dining room, documenting the original crown, molding, and the way morning light played across newly refinished floors. Catherine met with contractors in the foyer, her voice carrying professionally through the open door as she discussed paint samples and fixture installations. But awareness hummed between us like a live wire. When she passed the dining room doorway, our eyes would meet briefly. Small smiles passed between us when others weren't looking, private acknowledgments of our shared secret. She brought lunch as usual around 1 o'clock, sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. Her fingers brushed mine deliberately as she handed mine over, the touch brief but electric. We ate with the contractors, maintaining casual conversation about restoration progress, but I caught her watching me when she thought others weren't paying attention. The afternoon stretched like warm honey. I photographed detail work while trying not to count the hours until the workday ended. Catherine moved through the house efficiently, directing crews and answering questions, every inch the professional property owner. But there was a new lightness in her step, a brightness in her eyes that made me wonder if others noticed the change in her. At 5:45, I heard the contractors packing up their tools. Through the library window, I watched their trucks pull out of the gravel driveway one by one. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Come to the main house when you see them leave, bringing dinner to my study." I packed my camera carefully, trying not to rush despite the anticipation building in my chest. The evening stretched ahead, with possibility, and for once, neither of us was running from it. The main hotel looked different in dusklight. I climbed the front steps as the last traces of sunset painted the Victorian trim in deep purple shadows. Catherine stood in the doorway, silhouetted against warm interior light. When I stepped inside, she closed and locked the heavy door behind me, a small action that felt weighted with meaning. We were choosing this privacy together. The lobby stretched quiet and empty around us. Construction tarps and tools cleared away for the evening. Dust motes danced in the remaining light filtering through tall windows. Catherine had changed from her work clothes into a soft oatmeal sweater and dark jeans. Her hair fell loose past her shoulders, and she'd removed the practical clip she wore during the day. "Hi," she said softly, tucking a strand behind her ear, that familiar nervous gesture I'd grown to recognize. "Hi." I stayed where I was, letting her set the pace. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders like she was stepping into something brave. "We should probably talk about practical things first," I nodded. "Like the project timeline." "Yes, you're scheduled to be here through the end of October." She moved closer, close enough that I could smell her light perfume. "That's 3 more weeks." "The documentation work is on schedule," I said. "But I could find reasons to extend if needed. There's always more detail shots that could enhance the portfolio." A small smile played at her lips, looking for excuses to stay. Being honest about what I want, I held her gaze. "But I know we can't predict past that." "No," she shook her head. "And I wouldn't ask you to. We're at such different points in life, it wouldn't be fair to make promises about where this goes." "But it's not casual," I said carefully. "At least, not for me. Not for me either." She reached for my hand, twining our fingers together. "Come upstairs. I want to show you something." She led me up the grand staircase to the second floor, our footsteps echoing in the evening quiet. The master suite took up the northeast corner, its double doors standing open. Inside, the renovation was nearly complete. Original hardwood floors gleamed under temporary work lights. The fireplace dominated one wall, its Victorian tilework restored to jewel-toned glory. "The chimney repair finished today," Catherine said, running her free hand along the carved mantel. "It's functional now, though we haven't lit it yet." The metaphor wasn't lost on either of us, something beautiful and warmth-giving, restored but untested. We stood there in comfortable silence, still holding hands, while the house settled around us with soft creaks and sighs. Finally, Catherine turned to face me in the doorway. The work lights caught the silver in her hair, the quiet determination in her eyes. "Stay," she said simply. It wasn't a question but an invitation, carrying the full weight of everything unsaid between us. I understood what this meant for her, choosing to want something society might judge, choosing herself over convention, choosing to be brave instead of sensible. I stepped closer, bringing my free hand up to trace her cheek. She leaned into the touch, eyes closing briefly. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. She opened her eyes, meeting mine with clear certainty. "Yes, I'm done second-guessing this." We stood together at the suite's threshold, both knowing we were crossing into something irreversible. The autumn evening wrapped around us like a blanket, and somewhere in the walls, the old house creaked its quiet witness to our choice. Then, Yes, I said, drawing her closer. I'll stay. The staircase seemed different now, each step carrying the weight of our choice. Catherine's hand stayed warm in mine as we climbed, the restored wood smooth beneath our feet. I watched how the evening light played across her silver-streaked hair, how her shoulders held both tension and resolve. "The banister's original," she said softly, running her free hand along the polished oak. "Can you imagine how many hands have touched it over a century? How many moments like this it's witnessed?" I squeezed her fingers gently. "You've given it new life." She paused at the top of the stairs, turning toward one of the wall sconces she'd had rewired. Her fingers traced the brass fixture, and something in her expression opened up. I used to walk these halls when they were dark, trying to picture how it would look filled with light again. She glanced at me. Not just the building. Everything felt dim for so long. I understood she was sharing more than renovation plans. This was about second chances, about choosing brightness over familiar shadows. The hallway led us to the master suite, where tall windows held original stained glass. The setting sun transformed the colored panes into jewels, scattering rubies and sapphires across the hardwood floor. Catherine turned to face me, and any hesitation from earlier had vanished. When she reached for me, I met her halfway. This kiss felt different from our first, deeper, certain, full of shared understanding. Her fingers wove into my hair as I wrapped my arms around her waist, drawing her closer. She tasted like the tea she always drank in late afternoon, familiar now in the best way. When we finally parted, she took my hand again and led me to the bay window. The garden spread out below us, wild but promising. "See that foundation in the back?" She pointed to a weathered structure. "It was a gazebo once. I have the original plans, all lattice and gingerbread trim. That's next on the restoration list. It'll be beautiful," I said, understanding we were testing how to talk about future things. She leaned back against my chest. "You know, the documentation project could easily extend past a month. There's so much detail work to capture. I'd like that," I replied carefully, staying longer to do justice to all the details. The unlit fireplace stood patient across the room, waiting like all the possibilities stretching before us. I woke to watercolor light dancing across restored floorboards, the stained glass window filtering dawn into jewel-toned patterns. Catherine was already awake beside me, her fingertips tracing abstract shapes on my shoulder. The morning cast her in gentle relief silver threading through auburn hair. Laugh lines softened, tension melted from her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, unburdened in a way I hadn't seen during our weeks of careful distance. We didn't speak at first. Words felt unnecessary in the quiet acknowledgement of what we'd chosen, not just the physical intimacy of the night, but the deeper vulnerability of choosing this connection despite every rational argument against it. The weight of that decision rested comfortably between us, like the warm morning light painting colors across the floor. I watched as she slipped from bed, wrapping herself in a cream cardigan before padding to the suite's small kitchenette. Renovation detail she'd insisted on preserving from the original floor plans. The familiar sounds of coffee brewing filled the space, domestic and grounding. She brought 2 steaming mugs back to the bay window where we sat, watching thin mist retreat from the gardens below. "The contractors won't be here until 11 today," she said softly. "Sunday schedule. So we have time," I replied. And her answering smile carried none of yesterday's hesitation. When she laughed at something, I said, "I don't even remember what I reached for my camera on instinct." The shot captured her in perfect morning light. Head thrown back, eyes crinkled with genuine joy, cardigan slipping off one shoulder. It was the first personal photo I'd taken here, one that would never appear in project files, but would stay private. Precious. The fireplace that had stood cold last night now held fresh logs she must have arranged earlier, ready for evening. Looking around the suite at the coffee mugs, at Catherine curled comfortable and close, at the morning light playing across restored details, the hotel felt different. Less like a renovation project and more like a beginning, though neither of us spoke that thought aloud. We didn't need to. The quiet certainty of morning said enough. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe and set reminders. Tomorrow's might be the nudge, the hug, or the promise you've been waiting. FO. FO.